Ravi, first of all, welcome to the stage and thanks to the audience who stayed back after a good lunch. Uh, but
Hoping they're all awake.
let's try our best. I think
Yeah,
we'll do our best and we'll see how good,
sure.
how well engaged they are. But just to start the conversation, Ravi, we have heard about how generative AI or even AI is part of several earning reports or whatever you call it, right? Every call that the CEO is on, you will probably hear AI being referred there, right? You've been in technology all your life, and just wanted to understand the end users today, whether you talk of a retail or a pharma company, even their earnings reports, I mean, you will see AI being, I mean, spewed all around, right? Uh, and the nature of the democratic technology is such that even they are experimenting in-house. But within your own experience, what do you think has changed from then to now, especially from a data perspective?
Couple of things. So let's pick the question from the context of what the rest of us see in the world, right? Not the folks that are just kind of building these large-scale systems. I'll give you a couple of examples. So I'll pick, um, can't really call them modern, but they're kind of companies that have adapted. If you look at large data sets, and I think everybody will familiar with a data set which says, give me 20 years worth of stock data, so I can kind of discuss, determine some patterns in it, do some back testing and create a model. Well, that model occurs across the world in many domains. We have a customer in Ireland that essentially had large data sets for clinical trials. The idea being that if you were going to do drug discovery and you were kind of building out a protein or something like that, you could come and figure out what the similarity of similar things were in the data set they had. And a few years, I think they realized this too. SaaS was happening, things were moving to the cloud. They realized they can multiply access to customers if they create a SaaS service for the same data. The minute you take that first step, it takes you down the additional step of most of these people out there want to discover drugs. They're not really wanting to plow through clinical data from the last 20 years.
Right.
So they'd much rather engage with a data scientist that uses that service and helps them kind of get to the conclusions they want. So we've seen this evolution many-fold even in traditional stuff. So I'll stick with our traditional experiences and then talk about what we've been seeing more recently. Another example, if you take the example of electronic design automation, fancy word for chip design and many other things. Very large data sets, very repetitive work that you would do with those data sets, very compute intensive, but data is at the core of it, correct? We've had long history dealing with customers like that. It's a model that kind of mirrors what you see even in animation, for example. But what's changing now is data is turning from the byproduct to being the product. And what do I mean by that? Take the example of drug discovery again. Essentially, drug discovery in many cases culminates in a clinical trial. The clinical trial is all about trying the chemicals you've created, running a randomized clinical trial. It's the gold standard the world across. Once you're done with it, the IP is still yours. It's all data driven. And for the next 20 years, you're basically just monetizing it, correct? You, me, all of us know the drug that works for you doesn't work for me.
Right.
Because we come from maybe different ethnic backgrounds, we have different genetics, we have different lifestyles, we are of different age, we are different gender, there are multitudes of it. But the point is that data exists to be able to tell you that you are going to be responding differently to a medication than I am. And there's been a world out there that's been focusing on this. They call it real world evidence.
Right.
Now you look at real world evidence, the companies that are kind of innovating there, they're taking clinical trials. They're not ignoring it, but they are marrying it with healthcare data. They are marrying it with the payer data. They are managing it with multiple data sources you would not have imagined 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
So again, related to that question, right? Whose job is this? I mean, you have the IT guy who's making probably the decisions on the infra. You have the data scientist or maybe a similar person in the organization making an ML ops decision. But coming back, right, the CEO is the one who's answering these questions on an earnings call. Whose job is it? Is it the CEO's job, the CTO's job to get deeper into data management? Is it a priority today considering the kind of pressure and the kind of awareness that has come at least in the investor's mindset? So maybe if you can just throw some light.
And I think you brought this up rightly as a very, I think you made it was a very insightful comment. And I think the way you got it out was, we were discussing some of these use cases, and we're looking at the use cases around generative AI. We were looking at AI use cases in general, right? And you come down to the output of the AI system is clearly based on data, correct? But the traceability doesn't exist. People talk about responsible AI. You're discussing for all kinds of biases, all kinds of error. I'll give you an example. The first time we discussed this with some of the data scientists in our company, I asked them a question, how well do you understand data systems? And the question didn't make sense. So I asked, do you understand SAN protocols and NFS protocols, which are data access protocols? And not only did they not know, they didn't care to know, and they still don't care to know, and they shouldn't care to know. So the point really comes down to a data scientist. If you talk to them about storage protocol, they won't understand it. If you talk to them about capabilities like snapshotting, they won't understand it. But then when I asked them this simple question, I said, look, you're going to build a product, you're going to sell it to someone here, you're going to sell something similar to somebody else here. Now remember, the product is data. It's not like you package software and it's the same piece of software that runs everywhere. This is intuitions, insights that you're getting that are data-driven. It's founded on a data set. And 5 months later, you're going to be asked what caused this crash. Or you're going to be called what caused you to create this bias or prejudice in answer. It's going to come down to, do you have a model for basically managing your data? And you pointed out the data scientist doesn't really care. The business leader clearly does care. And I think the world has seen this problem 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when we created database management systems. But in today's world, I don't think that exists. If you talk to a data science, their primary way of interacting is with an AI ops or ML ops toolkit. Something, Python, very powerful toolkit people use. But the linkage between using it to manipulate data and using it to manage the life cycle of data, knowing that this data set on the 6th of November at 12 o'clock is what created a product that I sold to NetApp, right? You have to be able to have that. And I think it becomes a CTO level thing. You need to have a architecture, a modern architecture for data. And you have to have a mindset that data is a product, not something you're consuming as you operate a business or generating as you operate a business.
Very well said. And recently there is a EU regulation. Again, I'm just diverging away from the point, on traceability, right? EU today says that if you are a rubber producer, I mean, there are countries in Southeast Asia who are doing that. They put regulations saying if you have produced rubber on a deforested land, which has been deforested like after 2022, I won't buy from you. So today, people like that are having to actually provide traceability. I mean, we are just talking of traceability as a...
And you're talking about natural resource, and here you're talking about something that's bits and ultimately electrons flowing in a network.
And even ESG investors today are, like we spoke about, I think the last panel, they
everybody's been talking about that at some level or the other.
I think traceability is the big question, and given the lawsuits that you are seeing, at least the ones that are emerging, I think this will become a huge...
They're ethical also, right? People think there are biases that are creeping in that say, you know what, maybe you picked up your data at a point where, you know, color of skin or color of light around skin didn't matter to you, but it's having real impact on other people. It's a universal phenomenon. There's many such examples,
So is sustainability also a driver in this whole conversation? And if yes, then what is your view on that?
So sustainability is front and center for any business today. It's front and center for any CEO. You go back and look at our earnings call, it's front and center there. This week, we kind of produced our 2023 sustainability report. Two ways to think about it, really. are you building sustainable products? And clearly we are. In fact, if you just right now were to Google sustainability at NetApp, um, if you were to search sustainability at NetApp, I searched it on Google coming onto the stage, it'll put up a dashboard, right? And I wrote down the numbers, but if somebody pops up their phone, they're going to be able to see it. We talk about how intelligent design allows you to save, right? So 136 exabytes of storage. Exabyte is 18 zeros, right? That's material that was not consumed. That is a device that didn't consume electricity, and it is a process that didn't generate carbon, right? 421 gigawatts of storage saved. And this is not, I'm not reading a document, I just transcribed what a running meter on the website says, which means there's a pretty exhaustive system in place that's keeping track of how much carbon are you emitting, things like that. There's also standards, right? We are a global company, we build products for the world, even though we have a large development center just in Bangalore. But we are building products for the world. So you have accountability to the world. The UN has this mandate where they kind of have standards. We've reduced our emissions around scope 1, scope 2, about 31% in the last 3 years. If you ask me very honestly, I don't think sustainability was on a product manager's checklist 5-8 years ago, right? Today it solidly is. And so the point is, if you capture it as a requirement, you're going to produce an answer. It's like anything else. If you're going to optimize for product performance or product price or functionality or sustainability, the solutions are there. It's just a question of focusing on it. So that's front and center for us.
Yeah, sure. Wanted to also get your view on the transition that you're speaking about, right? Even in compute, you have, especially on the generative AI side, you moved from CPUs to GPUs, and then for some of the use cases, at least in the healthcare side, drug discovery, we're really talking quantum there, right? So the data is something, data management there probably hasn't been spoken as much. Of course, we have spoken it for compute at length, and related to compute, obviously we have spoken a lot about power consumption, energy efficiency, and so on and so forth. But in this whole changing dynamics of, the compute, the nature of
I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about when we talk infra, we think compute is one thing, network is another thing, storage is a third thing. Whether it's sitting in a data center is one thing, whether it's sitting in the cloud is another thing. The reality of the world is everything is on the cloud, at least in some part. A lot of it continues to be in data centers. It's going to stay that way for a really long time because for a number of reasons. We'll try and touch upon a few. But also the fact that they're not siloed, they are interconnected. And I think one of the examples you and I were discussing before we came in, we were talking to some of our partners. And it turns out the most critical constrained resource in the world today for every one of you that's doing anything with AI is the GPU. Okay? One, the device manufacturers can't make them fast enough. The cloud providers can't provide them in the quantities you want. And we met a couple that was so constrained on it that while they were waiting for their quota to be replenished, they figured, what can we do to optimize it? So at some point, you can look at that whole thing as I'm waiting for GPU, or you can say I'm trying to solve a problem, a generative AI problem. Now remember, generative AI doesn't unearth new facts. It discovers facts that are already buried in the data. So these guys figured that, you know what, every time we get a question, we'll see if we can answer it based on an answer we've given yesterday or a week before. You remember how caches work on computer systems? That's what they had. They had a cache of results. So they were able to kind of intelligently incorporate the data pipeline so that they were minimizing the impact they were having on a very expensive constrained resource like a GPU. So that's just one example of kind of how you can go optimize that way. But there's others that have done it in more creative ways.
No, great point. I think we did touch on the compute part. But just to bring you back to one point that I think we discussed during the break too, especially on the talent side, I think we require a lot of that, at least in India. Have you had any experience, especially in your CSR budgets and all, developing some of the pipeline?
I think number of had, and just to kind of give you the big picture of it, those of us that have grown up in the tech world, and I'm not talking about if you've grown up in the tech world in the last 5, 10 years, if you've grown up in the last 20, 25, 30 years, you've seen one thing, that it's been a great meritocracy. Where there was no opportunity, it's created opportunity. It's created opportunity based on what you know, right? It's one of the few fields even today that continues to do that. So that's kind of what drives our CSR focus at NetApp, particularly India, but even globally, right? So one of the things that we were looking at was how can we kind of use technology to amplify this equalization effect moving forward. Second, in India, we wanted to marry it to the NetApp India story, which is really a NetApp story, but applied in India. So look at India, what we've done. If you looked at the India Stack 1.0, we solved the problem of connectivity, right? So 3G got us all connected, 4G got us all connected. We solved the problem of identity, so you're not anymore unclear on who's doing what. We solved the payments problem. You combined the three of them into a stack. It has literally unleashed this country on the global stage in the last 5 years. Now look at what's happening next with India Stack 2.0. You're going to look at an AI infrastructure part of it. Our thinking was, what if you married creating a data intelligence talent pool? So if you're going to generate AI infra, that's half the cost. Think of it this way. Broadband today in India is 1/10 what it is anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
What if the AI infra is about half or 1/10 what it is in the rest of the world? And what if you had twice the number of data scientists? I think country becomes unstoppable, right? So based on that, a number of our folks, some of them are sitting over here as part of our CSR piece, started engaging with about 5 public schools, government schools in Bangalore. These are the kind of schools where they get children to come into school because they offer a meal. It's a very touching thing. It's like that's the kind of driver that gets the kids to send somebody to school because the parents haven't been to school. We figured we'd put data science or data intelligence a little bit into their curriculum. So at the first level, we started training 8th graders, 9th graders. About 1,000 of them, right? 500, then 1,000. And the impact is huge. When we went and talked to them, kids are trying to explain to you what they do. They're telling me what Python library they are using, right?
Really
they're telling me, I mean, they're asking questions to the broader audience. Have you thought about why this disparity exists? Now, I'm sitting in that audience and I'm thinking, you know, there's a lot of prejudice in the way that child presented that fact because it's based on their experience. And I'm saying, like, then I'm thinking, what's wrong with it? Maybe we need that kind of prejudice on the table when we're looking at everything else that's prejudiced on the table. Maybe we just need to learn to think about data. So that was just one example, yeah? There's one more I'll tell you, but that's a plug for Nasscom, so I'll leave it for the last. Should I?
Yeah, maybe a minute.
Yeah. So the other piece that we ended up doing was last year we had, I thought, what was a very engaging conversation between Debjani Ghosh at Nasscom and our visiting CPO, right? It was a hybrid kind of a conversation. Debjani was on the phone. Harv was sitting in the room with us. And out of the blues comes up, they were talking all kinds of things, tier 2, tier 3 cities, you know, talent in India, etc., and stuff like that. And Harv suddenly wakes up and says, you know, we could do a data intelligence program. So we engaged, partnered with Nasscom with their Future Skills initiative. They're also a sponsor here. Amazing amount of leverage, right? So we built a curriculum for data intelligence. We incorporated a couple of NetApp curriculum studies in here. Just so you know the scale of NetApp in India, 3,000 people. Scale of NetApp globally, 12,500 people. You look at some of the platinum sponsors over here, they have probably 15 times that many people in India, forget globally, right? So with that small scale, what Nasscom allows us to do is take curriculum that's highly relevant to universities, tier 2, tier 3 universities, touch about a few 100,000 students. Ultimately, we might hire 50 or 100. Our partners, our customers may hire another few hundred. But the point is this country, I think, will be relevant. It's a small initiative, highly leveraged.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what this country is producing across the board.
No, I think great point to stop on, but just to summarize, I think what we have really spoken about is other than compute and LLMs, I think data is a very important part, not just at a CXO level, at a CTO level, but also at a community level, to your point. If we can actually train a government school student on this, and if that becomes the pipeline for our emerging AI needs, I think nothing like that. I think as a country, we will probably benefit quite a bit, and hopefully our government services and all that can improve.
Super, yeah.
So
and
thanks a
for
lot,
all
Ravi.
the tech, I think it's the
Yeah.
thinking about data that becomes really important. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot for the
Take
conversation.
care.